Good morning, class. Thank you all so much for showing up to your 8 a.m. this morning. I know that can be a struggle for many of you. Don't bother, turn on those cameras. I'm not too worried about it. So either just listen to my lecture today, maybe take some notes if you're feeling it, or if you are like most of the students in this school, sit there, don't pay attention, and, ignore me. So today we're going to be starting in 1606 in American history. We are going to begin with James I giving charter rights to the Virginia Company. So this charter stated that the settlers had the same rights as the Englishmen. We know this, of course, was not quite true, and some controversy arose from that, and there were some bumps in the road along the way, but we'll get to that later in the unit. In 1607, the colonists landed in the Chesapeake at Jamestown. They found this land to be very swampy, hard to farm and build houses on, and mosquitoes ran rampant in the area, and made it very difficult to avoid disease. And a problem that these colonists faced in the beginning was the fact that they focused on building their individual wealth in gold rather than working towards group survival, which led the colonists to the first winter starvation. They didn't have enough food prepared, they weren't able to plant enough food to survive the winter, so they had to ask the Powhatan tribe to provide them some aid, that way they wouldn't starve to death. So following that great starvation period, John Smith introduced some discipline, and he said that he who shall not work shall not eat. This was rather effective. They did much better following this, now that they were scared out of not working, because they like to eat. So one of the main crops that the people of Jamestown would grow was tobacco. So the economy was based on tobacco, and John Rolfe had perfected tobacco by 1912. However, there were some problems with tobacco. It was a labor-intensive crop, required hours and hours of preparation, drying in the sun, and harvesting. And you can't grow tobacco all year round, so it was strictly a summertime crop. Additionally, the soil would become depleted very, very quickly when growing tobacco because it required a lot of nutrients to grow. So this boom in the tobacco industry in the colonies led to the headright system, which is where one person would be allotted 50 free acres of land, and they would have that land to work and to till as their own, and a portion of whatever they would grow would go to the overall good, and they would sell some, and some would go there, but the government would still own that land. The person could just farm it. Indentured servitude was also introduced at this time. Indentured servitude was the main labor force of the colony, and you would do it to work off debt to a person, or you would enroll yourself in indentured servitude to get freedom dues. So after so many years, usually 7, a person would be allotted some land or some money to begin their own life and start their own life without the indentured servitude. So in 1916, it is assumed that, unfortunately, the first slaves are sold in Virginia. And at the time, the House of Burgesses was introduced, and many of the wealthy tobacco farmers were those who were in office, and the common people were unable to participate in government because they didn't have that status over that money. So in the 1620s, the colonies begin to expand inland. This becomes a problem very quickly, of course, because we see some clashes with Native American tribes. So that is going to lead to a lot of problems down the road. And even to this day in 2021, we see a lot of issues between the indigenous people of America and others who have moved here and lived here for a while now. But we will touch more on that later. So moving on, and we're going to talk about the Powhatan tribe. So early interaction with the Powhatans was good, it was fine. But as the policy for tobacco farming became more aggressive and more land was needed for this growing, the white colonists pushed into Powhatan land and began taking it by force for their growing. This, of course, didn't sit well with the Powhatan, and they waged war on the settlers, rightfully so in my opinion, and that lasted until about 1644. The English had defeated the Powhatan, and they felt as though they were no longer a threat to them. And in 1660, we begin to see another land shortage in Virginia. So now for a quick discussion on Bacon's Rebellion of 1676. About 4,000 indigenous people and 40,000 whites would clash. And so the white settlers were pursuing the Doge natives, and they while they were pursuing the Doge, killed friendly Susquehannock natives. These farmers who were part of this rebellion were a poor people and didn't want to finance a fence to settle a border dispute, so rather they opted to just go to war with these indigenous people and attack them outright and hope to solve the issue that way. This, of course, definitely not the best way to solve this issue. So Bacon's group found only the native people who were friendly, and they massacred them anyhow, out of just anger and spite. Bacon's people then proceeded to burn the capital after the governor, Berkeley, changed his mind about pursuing these natives and recalled him and his forces. Bacon went on to die in 1676, and his following quickly dispersed and disappeared and really wasn't heard from on a wide scale again. So what was the importance of Bacon's Rebellion? So it sparked an incredible amount of native versus colonist conflict. As you can imagine, this becomes a huge problem for the expanding nation. This was also one of the first rebellions against royal authority. Someone in the colonies challenged the authority of someone who had been given power by the king, and so this goes on to, we see this theme later when the revolution really begins and stuff like that. We also see a significant division of classes and regions within Virginia. These farmers who were a part of this rebellion were of the lower class. They were poorer people, and they rebelled against the upper class, the authority, the governor of Berkeley. And we see that division really there and how they aren't going to be pushed around. And slavery is seen as the most stable force of labor rather than paying people to do work. The settlers felt that slaves could be more easily controlled, and so started to more heavily rely on them as a labor force. So moving into some life in Virginia. Virginia had a bicameral legislature. They had the House of Burgesses and the Governor's Council. The religion of Virginia was primarily Anglican, and the education was not particularly important. Not a lot of focus was put on education. In fact, there was no public schooling at this point. And there also really were no urban centers, so information took a long time to flow between communities. And so I think in that way, not many ideas were able to get around to new people. So now discussing Maryland in 1634 was owned by Lord Baltimore, which is where we get the city of Baltimore from. The city of Baltimore and Maryland itself was a refuge for Catholics seeking religious freedom. That's where we get the Maryland Act of Tolerance. It is the first law for religious tolerance in the United States. Tobacco and indentured servants and slaves, that's still like a part of Maryland culture, I think, but we see maybe a little less of that in Maryland. But the important part of Maryland is that it is a place of religious freedom for Catholics. So the Carolinas in 1670 The Carolinas are referred to as the Restoration Colonies. King Charles II gave land to his supporters, and these ended up being the Carolinas. So North Carolina is primarily farms for tobacco and pine tar. It's very mountainous, and it's a lot of smaller farms all throughout the region. South Carolina is more aristocratic, so there are more plantations. They grew indigo and rice, and they were settled by slave owners from the Caribbean. These people, they bring harsh forms of slavery with them. This include, just absolutely brutal punishment for those who disobeyed or did anything to displease their masters. This is in contrast to some other forms of slavery that we see in the area. Again, completely awful and terrible that this would ever happen, but it is historically correct, so I will report it. In 1776, the population of the Carolinas was 2 black slaves to 1 white man. So the form of chattel slavery, the mindset is that slaves are treated as property, and they are based on race. I think that's pretty much all you have to know about that mindset. So now discussing the middle colonies. The middle colonies include Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. So let's talk about the evolution of colonial life. So in the first 25 years of settlement in the New World, the population doubles, and it continues to do so every subsequent 25 years. The birth rate and life expectancy also go up. So involving immigration and slavery, in the 1630s the Great English Immigration occurs. And from the 1700s and on, many German, Scottish, and Irish and African slaves come to the nation. Philadelphia and Charleston serve as the main ports of entry. These cities are very poor, but these port cities bring in a lot of new people to the country. So the Piedmont region is where many of these immigrants would settle. The Piedmont region includes the Appalachian Mountains. So the distribution of wealth throughout the colonies, New England was typically very wealthy, very affluent, and these people were wage workers. In the South, the elite farmers control the society. The freeman farmers are the largest group, but they are very, very poor. Slavery at this time is growing at an exponential rate, and it's very easy to get slaves, and less indentured servitude is necessary. So, one way that we, the main way really that we see slavery becoming more and more popular in the colonies is because of the triangle trade. Africa to the colonies, and then the colonies to Europe. We see this trait of slave movement and other people moving throughout the world in this triangular fashion. I think that is all we need to touch on today. I know we touched on a lot of slavery and a lot of heavy topics, but in our next unit we're going to move on to ideas from the Enlightenment and things like that. So we're going to be introduced to some big thinkers, and we're going to start to look at some other American history. But I think it's very important that we all have a good background on this information, because it is a part of our history, and those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, and that is a very scary thing. So thank you all so much for showing up to class today. I will see you all next Thursday for the next class, and following Thursday's lecture, we will have a short 10-question quiz on the 2 lectures. So I will see you all then. Thank you. Bye-bye.